Session. Okay, good morning, everyone. We will start the webinar presentation proper in about 6 minutes. But for now, just to remind everyone that if you do have any questions for Colin or me here in our Dubai office, please enter the questions into the comment or chat box that you find on the YouTube page there, and then we will do our best to answer them in the Q&A session once we've done the presentation itself. We've already received a few questions from some of our listeners, viewers in advance, and through our LinkedIn page. So we're going to put those up now, and then we will do our best to answer them. We're also today going to do a live poll. We did a poll in another webinar a couple of weeks ago, and I want to compare the answers that were made then with the answers we make today to see if there's been an improvement in everyone's outlook or whether it's actually worsened. So please do that poll whenever you get a chance, please, and then we'll look at the answers to that afterwards. So I can see we've already got a couple of questions there, but if any of you do have any questions or any comments or points that you want to make, please feel free at any time to put it into the live chat box, type it in, and we'll do our best to either note the observation, feedback, or answer it. So anyway, we will start in a couple of minutes, just waiting for everyone to join. And another just a reminder as well that if you have or want a copy of this presentation, of this deck, in the description box on your YouTube page, underneath, you will see down below, you will see a link to click and where you can enter your email address, and then we'll be able to share with you the presentation itself. And indeed, if you have any questions as well, you can also reach out to us anytime. So Colin, as everyone can see, we're here together today. On the previous weeks, we've been in work from home doing these presentations. I guess that's an indicator of the ceasefire and the improved situation generally. How do you feel things are right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of general mood in Dubai and the rest of the UAE, I think the mood has improved. Obviously, we're back in the office. A lot of companies continued working in the office throughout the conflict period. Anyway, I think the big change that's happened this week from a people point of view is the announcement yesterday that schools can return back from the 20th of April. I think that's quite a significant decision, and I think it also reflects that the challenge is shifting. I think for a month and a week or so, we were very much focused on the security issue and safety and people's safety from the conflict. We're now looking more at that sort of economic impact, and I think schools are an important thing to try and get the economy back to a more normal footing.
Yeah, no, certainly it's a good indicator, isn't it, of economic health and the security situation in the country. And I'm sure certainly the case in my household. I'm sure many people with young children will be very happy the fact that kids will be able to go back to school.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure many companies are experiencing this. With children at home doing remote learning, it's impacting employees' ability to go to work and do work themselves if they've got to provide childcare at the same time. So the sort of economic drag is quite significant. Plus, there's the confidence factor. if there was the prospect of a long-term remote learning situation, people that are living here may have considered that families going to home countries or elsewhere to continue their schooling. So I think that was very important as well.
Yeah. Do you think there's any issues with teacher recruitment?
I think there probably will be. I mean, there's obviously a churn within schools, as there is in any business every year. That tends to, just the way schools work, tends to come in the summer at the end and beginning of a school year. I think it will be a more difficult thing recruiting people to come and work in the UAE compared to previous years. So I think that will be a challenge, and retaining staff will probably be something that schools are prioritising at the moment.
I guess we'll find out in September when the new year starts. Certainly, I think Q4 is going to be more important than ever. It's always a very important period, but I think after this fairly difficult start to the year, and then with the summer, I think Q4 for many businesses for the final 4 months of the year, especially with all the events and exhibitions being postponed and delayed into that part of the year, it's going to be more critical than ever for a lot of industries and businesses to survive the year.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, we'll start to see some economic data when I mean, the first quarter data, as we've seen across a lot of things, has not really reflected the conflict. The conflict only impinged on the March numbers, and there's a time lag for quite a lot of the reporting that's going on. I think the second quarter will get much more of an idea about what's coming through, and then the real impact will start to be felt later this year, and then hopefully the psyche can start looking at a recovery in the fourth quarter. Just to perhaps add maybe a cynical dose of realism there, we're still not out of the conflict situation. I think it's important to stress that it's still very much a ceasefire rather than a peace deal. So there's still some very major unanswered questions there, but things are looking a little bit more positive than they have.
And of course, the ports still remain largely closed due to lack of shipping.
Yes,
passing through the Strait of Hormuz. That hasn't actually changed all that much. All right, so we'll kick off now with the executive briefing proper. Just again, a couple of reminders. If you want a copy of this webinar deck, a PowerPoint presentation, then please fill in your details, your email address in the link below. Click on that and you will get taken to a page to submit your email address, and then we will send you a copy of it. Also, you may see in the chat box, we're doing a poll. If you can answer that, that would be great. Then I'll be able to compare the situation today from you with the same poll we did 2 weeks ago to see if the outlook for your business has changed at all. I can see you've already had 74 people answer that poll. So it'd be great if we can get as many of you as possible answering that. And also, of course, Colin and I will be taking your questions live directly. If you do have any questions for us, please put them into the chat box and we will do our best to answer them once we've done the presentation. All right, so let's kick off. So where are we today in terms of how the market, with regards to the projects market, is performing in the GCC region? So one way to look at that is by looking at the value of contracts awarded in the month of March, or since the conflict started on the 28th of February. And what we can see here is that actually, all things considered, given this, the conflict and the closure of the ports and Strait of Hormuz and the various attacks and facilities and so on, the market performed pretty well in terms of work awarded. And we can see here on the graph on the right, about $12.8 billion worth of work awarded in the GCC in March. Now that compares fairly well to the $20 billion or so awarded in November, December, January. It's a bit down on February, which was an exceptional month due to a couple of large oil and gas contracts, but it's certainly nowhere near zero. There's still big contracts being awarded. There's still contracts being tendered, indeed, and even today, I saw a couple of major contracts being awarded, a big couple of projects announced. So the market is still moving. Construction is still ongoing on most project sites. Work is still being tendered. Bids are still being submitted. And to a large extent, work is still continuing as normal. Whether that will remain the case as material supplies start drying up with port closures or become more difficult, we'll explore that in a bit. But currently, for March, nearly $13 billion worth of work awarded, which is a pretty decent performance, all things considered. As of yesterday, for the first half of April, we can see about $7 billion worth of work awarded. So if we pro-rata that for the month as a whole, we'll be looking at about $13 to $15 billion for April as well. So a continuation of that trend in March. So not a bad performance all round. I think that underlines the sort of market's resilience and confidence. So in terms of where the work is being awarded, we can see UAE, particularly the UAE oil and gas sector in Abu Dhabi and Dubai real estate market are continuing to prop up those numbers. Some $14 billion awarded last couple of months. And then we have Saudi Arabia, $5.3 billion. Of course, PIF just announced its latest 2026 to 2030 revised strategy, which Colin will talk about in a bit. And we can see Oman, 1 billion, Kuwait, 2.7 billion, good performance there. And Bahrain, just $11 million. Colin, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think there's a good what-if question to throw in here, which is somewhat hypothetical. But I think had there not been a conflict, I think the conversation we would be having would be, why is the Saudi market accounting for such a small percentage of the contract awards? I mean, it's the largest country by geography, population, and in terms of potential for its projects market, and it's sitting there with about a quarter of the awards. So it's the performance from Saudi Arabia there. And I think had there not been a conflict, I think that would have been dominating our conversation.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to see whether this new PIF strategy actually results in an acceleration in activity there back to the levels that we saw in 2023, 2024, when the kingdom set an all-time record high for work awarded in the region. All right, just to support that previous slide with the actual individual projects, or some of them anyway, here's a selection of the key projects that have been awarded in the last 6 weeks or so. As you can see, some big gas projects in Abu Dhabi, Habshan 7, new gas processing train, phase 3, the NGL fractionation train 5, second phase, also in Abu Dhabi. Talking of Saudi Arabia, we saw a very important contract awarded for Super Block 5 for Ruwa Medina. That's the first major above ground assets awarded for that Giga project, of course, a subsidiary of the PIF. We also saw a major PPP deal, the K9 Trading Center, points of entry contract. The data center, the big news about this humane government entity developing one of the world's largest government data centers. The first one of those was awarded. Diriyah continues to be one of the largest and most active clients in the kingdom. Pendri Superblock was awarded $666 million. And then we can see a range of other significant projects ranging from real estate to oil and gas to power and water and so on. So work is still being awarded, activity remains, and I believe this is emblematic of the market remaining still relatively confident across all of the major markets and sectors. Okay, so let's go to the poll question, which you have in the chat box, which I'm sure I can see many of you have already responded to. This is the poll question. How badly to date has your company been impacted by the Iran conflict, if at all? And there were 4 responses. 1, very badly. 2, quite badly. 3, it hasn't impacted us yet, but we expect it will. Or 4, it hasn't impacted us and we don't expect it to. So if you haven't already, please answer that in the poll box, in the chat box. So I asked this question 2 weeks ago on a live webinar. 2 weeks ago is a long time in this current situation, Colin, I think we can all agree. And before I would go through the answers the previous time, let's look at the answers here. We have currently very badly saying 17%, quite badly saying 35%. It hasn't impacted us, but we expect it will, 46%, 45% now, and it hasn't impacted us and it won't, 3%, and that's from 119 votes. So let's see how that compares with the result from 2 weeks ago when we had 255 responses. Then the answer was it has the clear leader was it hasn't impacted us yet, but we expect it will, with 63%. Now, what's interesting here is that when I compare that with the poll today, where the answer for that question is 45%, that suggests, doesn't it, Colin, that actually it's worsening for companies?
Yeah, it's creeping in.
It's creeping in.
Creeping in.
Okay. And when I say when we look at quite badly, here we have 34% say it's hit us quite badly, and in 2 weeks ago it was 24%, so quite badly. So there's an increase in companies which have been hit, or saying quite badly, and 17% are now saying they've been hit very badly, compared with 7% last 2 weeks ago. So it does seem that companies are increasingly beginning to feel the strain.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing, if we try and just think about what's going to happen in the future, if we do this webinar in 2 weeks' time, is that going to mean that the percentage is going to shift along at the same rate? Or is it going to mean that all of a sudden all companies start to feel it? And I think some of the supply chain issues are really starting to bite. And my concern is that that percentage will all of a sudden jump up very suddenly as the contagion effect starts to spread. So I think it's something which is at the moment creeping in, but I think once it really hits, it will spread very, very quickly.
Okay, yeah. I think stocks of materials are pretty much now exhausted, and
for certain items. There's a lot of nuances on that. We'll discuss it later on.
Yes, you're going to go through that, aren't you, in a slide in a bit. So it does seem that more and more companies are being impacted based on the comparing the polls with today and 2 weeks ago. That said, nearly half of companies, or of you here today on this webinar, are saying you haven't been impacted yet by the crisis. So that, on the plus side, isn't too bad either. Right. Colin, over to you. You're going to talk a little bit about this very issue around logistics and impact on the industry. And
I think if we just try and remember back to the 28th of February, I think probably the first thing that will have come into people's minds after the immediate safety concern, those thinking about projects, we've been down this road in slightly different forms over the last 5 years, is there's going to be supply chain disruption. And that's obviously something that we've been concerned about. That, as the poll suggests, is something that hasn't had an immediate impact. It started to have an impact on specialist items that were coming in. The first noises I heard of supply chain disruption came from things like specialist fit out furniture deliveries from suppliers. Then into other things that are again a bit more specialist, so it'd be things like MEP equipment and facades. We're now starting to hear noises about it affecting more on the basic materials side of things as well. It's difficult to know exactly what's going on. I've covered situations where there's been a spike in rebar prices before, concerns about availability for different reasons in the past. And there's a lot of information out there which is confusing as traders, sellers, suppliers, buyers are not sure what's going on, and there's people trying to control the market for their own end. So it's very difficult to know exactly what's going on, but for sure there's a concern now about basic building materials. And if we look at why that is, you know, it's quite obvious really. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed. Ships haven't been coming in. An awful lot of bulk items and heavy materials that are brought in by ship have not been able to get into the ports inside the Gulf. So that's restricted a lot of the options. There are other options to bring materials into the Gulf from outside the Strait. The UAE has two significant ports sitting outside the Strait, and of course in Saudi Arabia, there's port facilities there, but
and Omani ports as well.
And those ports aren't necessarily as large as the ports sitting in the Gulf. And then you've got that overland transport issue to contend with. And then on top of that, there's obviously the cost implication. So there's some real world problems kicking in there in terms of getting materials and equipment delivered to site. That's having a number of impacts. Obviously, there's a time implication there, and also a cost implication. Yeah, I'm sure most people that are out there engaged in the industry have got stories of their own, but the stories of shipments ending up back at their original destination or ending up at random port. So it's really a disrupted supply chain at the moment, and that's something that I think the industry's going to have to contend with. Speaking with people in the logistics industry, that the feeling is that even if the Straits was to open immediately, previous experience has shown from other disruption events that it takes several months for ships to end up where they're meant to be, containers to go back to where they are, and for that disruption to normalise. So it's an issue that we're going to have to deal with for quite some time. Yeah,
I mean, and of course the whether it's a contractor or supplier or client or whatever, any type of company, they can't control the shipping companies either. I mean, the shipping companies ultimately will determine where and when the products can be delivered.
Yeah, and I mean, just an interesting aside, I think the shipping companies, I mean, if you look at some of the logistics providers over the last 5 years, they've shifted their business strategy. If you take DP World, for example, you know, for many years we considered them just as a port operator. They consider themselves now as an end-to-end logistics provider, and I think that strategy at the time, you know, it might have sounded a little bit like, you know, marketing speak, but I think that's really coming to the fore now as you start to see some of these other solutions in terms of bringing goods and materials into the market. If we go to the next,
and of course, mustn't also forget the in the UAE at least 72% increase in diesel costs when you're transporting goods from far afield. That's in trucks. That's going to ramp up the cost quite a bit.
I mean, I think it's important to note really that we've been talking about this idea of the Strait of Hormuz and the problems that are associated with it being potentially closed off is not something that we've not thought about before. You know, if we cast our mind back 15 years, there was speculation that there would potentially be some sort of sea lane or canal dug across the peninsula to open up the Gulf to outside to avoid the Strait. You know, there's been talk of that before. Obviously, there's been pipelines built, so railway connections as well. So it's not a new strategic threat that's appeared. What's happened is it's become a real strategic threat. So there are things in place. And there's new things or newer things which are now starting to really come to the fore. So as I mentioned, there's ports in Corfu and Fujairah in the UAE, Sohar Salalah in Oman. I think the interesting one, and that will lead us in a little bit later into the Saudi Arabia story and the PIF strategy, is you're starting to see NEOM position itself as a port which can help with this sort of outside the strait and transport solution. And if we look there at the map, this is something that NEOM themselves posted on X just yesterday, in fact, about how they are able to service markets. And if you look at what's happening, there's shipping coming into Egypt, and again that highlights the importance of Egypt strategically, where it sits between Africa and Asia. Interestingly, the ships aren't going through the Suez Canal. They're docking at Damietta and then traveling overland to Safaga and then into what we know as the port of Neom now, but previously was known as Double Port, and then materials being overlanded into various parts of the GCC. And if you look in the local media in the UAE over the last couple of days, there's been quite a lot made of things being brought overland into the UAE, particularly foodstuffs and other essential type of items. And that's used exactly the route that's shown in that graphic which Neom provided. So you can see some new things coming through. Another land bridge option, which I wrote about quite a bit last year after a trip to Istanbul, is the Turkey land bridge, which is something which Turkey is very keen on. They're trying to really provide a connection between Europe and the Middle East. The Turkey connection up to Europe is already well established, and they see there's an opportunity there to then provide the next link south through Syria, Jordan, etc., into the GCC. And we're seeing other things as part of that drive starting to come into place. Obviously, there's a railway in Jordan, which the UAE's Etihad Rail are involved in the development of. So there's other overland routes which can be used at the moment, but will be enhanced further into the future. And then the other thing which isn't on this graphic is this sort of air, land, sea, air type concept. You know, there are obviously airports which are still operating, which can be used to bring materials in. So lots of options there, but not as large scale and as significant as obviously the main ports that sit inside the Gulf. Okay, as I mentioned, or Ed mentioned as well, there's the announcement of PIF's new strategy. I think really there's a number of takeaways that have come from that, and it seems a little bit strange that we're talking about that in a webinar which is really talking about the conflict, but I think it's got some important links into that overall theme. I think the number one thing I would say is that it's got a real focus on domestic development. That's something which I think Saudi Arabia was focusing on anyway. I think there was a concern that a lot of the giga projects in particular were missing the mark in terms of some of the domestic requirements in Saudi Arabia. Obviously, some of those priorities have changed, and that makes the Saudi market looking forward a much more resilient one as it looks at that domestic focus. It's not relying so much on things like tourism, for example, which could be quite challenging over the next few years. So I see that resilience piece, which is a word that we keep seeing all the time now, is baked in a lot more into the PIF strategy. And again, that Neom story, again, it's got explicit backing in the strategy as one of the 6 core ecosystems which PIF's developing. And as the previous slide showed, it's got quite a strategic location at the moment, which it can exploit to its advantage. So some interesting things there about how a sort of an economic strategy document was going that way anyway, but it shows how there's the answer to the conflict problem is starting to come through in terms of government policy or company policy in the terms of PIF. So some interesting things there to look at, and possibly some of those themes and echoes will be replicated elsewhere in the region as they start to look beyond the sort of the immediate conflict and look at the sort of economic recovery going forwards.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting. The PIF said yesterday or this morning that Neom is not cancelled. The line is not cancelled. It's just one component of Neom. It's maybe not going to be completed by 2030, but it's still in the long-term plans.
Yeah, I think there were some other comments, weren't there? There were things that were needed would be prioritised, and things that were still good ideas would be phased. I think there's a lot of things that will fall into the phased bucket, as it were. But you're starting to see what the priorities are, and they'll be and now back. Yes, Saudi Arabia perhaps doesn't have the liquidity to do some of the more ambitious projects that they were looking at doing, but they still have significant budgets to deliver core infrastructure.
Absolutely, they certainly do, and they still have very ambitious long-term and short-term plans. Indeed, if you want to watch a wider discussion on the Giga Projects program in Saudi Arabia, then we did a Giga Projects webinar just a couple of weeks ago. It was recorded as this is, and if you go to the MEED YouTube page, you'll be able to watch the recording of that webinar where I gave a presentation on the various different Giga projects right now. But very much the focus is on Riyadh and the Riyadh Giga projects as the kingdom ramps up for World Expo 2030 and of course the 2034 World Cup. And indeed, if you want to watch both this, previous webinars we've done on the Iran, that Colin and I have done on the Iran conflict, and keep up to date with the forthcoming webinar plans, then please subscribe to the MEED YouTube page, and you'll hear first when the next webinars are going to take place. All right, so we'll for the Q&A, and just a reminder, if you do have any questions for Colin or me, please put them into the chat box and we'll do our best to answer them. And also, if you want a copy of this presentation deck, then please click on the link below. You can see it below. There is a link there. Click on that, enter your email address, and we'll email you a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. Right. Before we do the Q&A, I wanted to go through what I believe, and Colin and I believe, are the winners and losers from the conflict so far, because of course it's not over yet. I think it's important to stress, as Colin stressed earlier, we are in a ceasefire, but the ultimate conclusion to the situation is still to be seen. But as of now, these are, in our opinion, subjectively, what we see as the winners and losers to date. Now, you might agree, you might disagree. Eager to hear your thoughts. Put them into the chat box, and we'll explain our reasoning here. So, losers. Let's do the losers first, shall we? Trump clearly miscalculated in the attack on Iran. I think whatever credibility he may have had, and some people would argue he didn't have any anyway, has dissipated as a result of this attack. I think, and that ties in really with, in my view, the strategic position of the USA as a sort of moral arbiter of what happens globally. I think it's taken a big hit. Its reputation has been taken a big hit, and it will remain to be seen whether it will recover its preeminent position in the region, whether many of the Gulf states will move or align closer with other emerging powers like China, India, or realign themselves globally. So I think USA and Trump have taken a big hit from the crisis so far. I think also the Gulf Coast, and when I may say the Gulf Coast, I mean really the ports, the investments, the facilities in and along the Gulf Coast. I think the situation has really emphasized the criticality of the Strait of Hormuz and the risks of developing export manufacturing facilities on the Gulf Coast, given how easily the straits have been closed. And conversely, when we look at the winners, which I'll come to, I think the Red Sea coast and the Oman coast are going to be considered more attractive than ever before, simply because they lie outside the Strait of Hormuz. Right, other losers. Well, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar in the Gulf. Not only have they been hit pretty hard by Iranian attacks, but also they of the Gulf states do not have export options outside of the Strait of Hormuz. So while Saudi Arabia has, of course, the Red Sea coast, UAE has the Gulf of Oman coast for export outlets. Taking a look at Qatar, for example, its LNG facilities hit. It has no alternative means of exporting its gas. Same with Kuwait. No way to export its oil other than by ship. It has no other export outlets, no export pipelines, and a similar situation for Bahrain. So I think not only in terms of the damage that's been done, but also in terms of recovery, they've probably been the worst hit. Lebanon, of course, really for obvious reasons, being invaded by Israel, turmoil there, a widespread scale upheaval. Lebanon always seems to be one of the countries hit hardest in the region, whatever happens, and that sadly continues to be the case. And then in terms of sectors, aviation, for no obvious reasons, tourism related to that, the Gulf airlines obviously hit hard by airport closures, airspace closures, and confidence in the tourism market. No doubt they will bounce back, but the long-term impact, of course, remains to be seen. And then finally, fossil fuels and Iraq. Fossil fuels, if anything, I think you might agree or disagree with me here, Colin, in fact, on any of these aspects. If anything, it's reminded the world of the dependency on oil and gas and how important it is to reduce that dependency. And why one of the reasons I put renewables as a winner out of this conflict is because it's going to just accelerate that drive to reduce that dependency. And then finally, I've also got Iraq there as well. Iraq, limited export avenues. Yes, it does have a pipeline through to Iraq, but that's been hit, is often closed. It too doesn't have a lot of options, and of course it's got sectarian challenges as well within the country itself. Colin, you got any thoughts on those?
Just an observation, really. I mean, I think your Gulf Coast the inclusion there's an important one, and I'm sure people in the region, if you've flown from the Dubai or the UAE up to Kuwait, that Gulf Coast is, you know, from someone that's interested in projects in the region, there's just billions and billions of dollars of investment that have gone along that coastline, whether it be, you know, the first things that you see are sort of Palm Deira, Palm Jumeirah, various tourism developments. Then you shift into the sort of the Ras Laffan, and then up through Saudi Arabia. There's a huge amount of investment that's gone on to a lot of infrastructure across a wide variety of sectors, which is now, some of it's been physically damaged, and the business case for some of it has been somewhat undermined due to this conflict. So it's a real impact there.
Yeah, I mean, if you are a foreign investor, or an investor in general, you'd be thinking twice, wouldn't you, about investing on the Gulf Coast rather than, say, the Gulf of Oman or in Oman or in the Red Sea, I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, certainly there's going to be an extra level of questioning done about the security of that investment going forward.
So on a neutral, who's neither a winner nor a loser? Right. So again, eager to hear your thoughts and feedback on this list, because it is, of course, subjective. But in my view, neutral. So Israeli strategically, Israel has really neither won nor lost from this so far. It has decimated the Iranian military capability to attack it. It certainly put back, destroyed its nuclear facilities and refining complexes in Iran itself, and it has made headway into taking over the southern strip of Lebanon. However, you can neither say that's been a complete success, because neither issues such as regime change or the defeat of Hezbollah have been achieved. So I think for the time being, we can say that Israel has achieved part of its objectives strategically, but not necessarily all of them. Iran, tactically, Iran's military base has been destroyed to a large extent. Its air force, its air defense, its navy, but it's still able to create threats through its drone and missiles, and it's shown that it can indeed control the Strait of Hormuz. So it's in one way lost a lot of military assets, but in other ways it's still retaining that upper hand in that aspect. UAE, Saudi Arabia. Okay, so yes, both have been hit, UAE particularly hard. More missiles have been sent and drones have been sent toward the UAE from Iran than have to Israel, which might seem counterintuitive, but that is the case. On the other hand, UAE has managed to show that its defenses have held up. Life continues as normal to a certain extent. And it's been able to, as has Saudi Arabia, been able to maintain some sort of export capability through the pipelines towards Fujairah and towards the Red Sea, so the East-West pipeline and the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline, ADCOP. So both have been able to, unlike Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, able to maintain some sort of export. Colin?
I think the UAE as well. I think we often tend to think of the UAE, particularly the people that live in the various emirates, as individual emirates and as part of a federation. I think the UAE as a concept, as a country, has come to the fore a lot more during the conflict, and I think that's something that we'll see a lot more going forward.
Yeah. Yes, and of course we must remember this is only provisionary, right? This might change a lot. This whole slide might change a lot in 2 weeks' time, depending on their outcome. China and Egypt, we say, are neutral. China, by staying fairly neutral in this conflict, has potentially, well, it's not neither won nor lost really, but it could be a case where China slowly becomes the most important trading and political partner for the GCC. Likewise, Egypt, as we just saw in the previous slide, is a vital conduit now for imports and exports, and its strategic position on the Suez Canal has been reinforced. Data centers and the AI economy. Now, data centers were becoming one of the most critically important and fast-growing sectors in the GCC projects market, but we saw some of the large Amazon data centers being hit by Iranian strikes, some of the services they offer going down, and now it remains to be seen whether the region can continue to position itself as an investment center for data center construction. Indeed, there might be a complete reconfiguration of how data centers are built. There is talk about more than being built underground, for example, more power supply contingency measures, and indeed whether even data centers should be built in one large single complex, which is harder to defend. That's something that we'll wait and see. The projects market, obviously, the projects market is going to be impacted by what's happened. We talked extensively just now about material supply, but as we've also seen, contract awards are still being made, projects are still being launched, tenders are still happening. So we'll no doubt have, and I can see you've already got lots of questions about that as well. So we'll discuss that in more detail. And then Netanyahu, pretty much tied to Israel's strategic. Has he achieved his ambition of regime change in Iran, destroying Hezbollah? Not yet, but he's also had some success in achieving some military objectives in both Lebanon and Israel. So again, neutral for now. Any thoughts on what I've just gone through there, Colin?
No, I think the data center ones is an interesting one. I mean, the Gulf still provides some key underlying selling points in terms of its attractiveness for data centers, but obviously that security issue is something which is front and center of people's mindsets at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops going forward.
And then winners, well, Russia. Oil price has gone up. Some of Russia's sanctions on some of its oil exports have been lifted by the US. So it's been able to benefit financially, and its position as a critical oil and gas exporter has been reinforced there. So for the time being, we can consider Putin and Russia as having been a kind of winner from the last 6 weeks. Now, controversial one maybe, but strategically, Iran, has it emerged a winner so far from this? Well, it's shown that it's been able to indeed control the Strait of Hormuz if it so wishes. It's been able to survive the barrage of air attacks, missile attacks on it. It's retained its uranium enriched stockpile, and it's shown really that the military option to defeat it and to overturn the regime is really no longer on the cards. It doesn't seem that really is an option. So if it were to emerge from negotiations with sanctions lifted, with the economy reopening, then one can argue that it's emerged as a winner from this whole conflict. What do you think?
Yeah, it's looking like one of the classic things where asymmetric warfare, you can lose every battle, but still come out of a war better than your opponent. And in some ways, Iran's following that path that other people have followed before. But again, we're still at a midpoint where we can't really make a final call. But as things stand at the moment, I think their primary objective was regime survival, and at the moment that's who the US are negotiating with, and they're surviving.
Right, we talked about this earlier, the Red Sea coast. Well, and I should add, really, the Oman coast. But I guess most people now will be looking and saying, well, do I want to invest my petrochemical facility or my manufacturing facility on the Gulf? Should I invest maybe in Duqm, Salalah, Sohar, or Yanbu, Rabigh, Neom, indeed?
Yeah, I think there's two things to look at that, and I think you're right to bring out the sort of the industrial base. So yes, the industrial base on the Red Sea and sitting outside on the Gulf of Oman will be a winner there. I think just to pour a little bit of negativity on the Red Sea coast prospects, we've seen a lot of investment going into tourism on the Red Sea coast, particularly in Saudi Arabia, high-end luxury tourism. I think that's going to be challenged from an international visitor point of view, as they'll not be that keen on traveling to a region that's mired with conflict. But then again, on the flip side of that, there's still a large domestic tourism market in Saudi Arabia that would be looking for places to stay. So maybe it would benefit there. But there's certainly on the tourism side, I think the Red Sea coast is a little bit more nuanced, but without a doubt, the industrial and logistics importance of sitting outside of I'd say out of the strait has been a winner there.
And tied to that, of course, is Oman, an undisputed winner, I think, from this conflict. Not only has it been only very lightly hit, and indeed there's some discussion or controversy whether, in fact, Iran actually sent drones or missiles to Oman, and some people are arguing that it didn't come from Iran. But anyway, regardless, its position as a neutral arbiter, a mediator, as an investment destination, not being hit. I think Oman, especially with its coastline, its ports, providing access into the GCC, I think is going to emerge stronger from this overall. And again, tied to that, rail, ports, and logistics. In my very firm opinion on this, I think this whole conflict is going to propel and accelerate investment in interregional, cross-regional rail freight networks. The importance of having across Saudi land bridge, for example, linking the two coasts with freight rail, has been, I think, emphasized more than ever before. Freight rail links to Sohar, Muscat, and Salalah, and maybe Duqm port as well. Again, emphasized inter-country freight networks, UAE to Saudi, Qatar to Saudi, Kuwait to Saudi, for example. Again, must be adding huge impetus as a result of this conflict. And similarly, investment in ports, port expansions outside the Strait of Hormuz, robust logistic networks. These are going to come out here, I think, with a real spotlight and an increased investment. Renewables, as I mentioned, obvious, I think, globally that that having 20% of the world's fuel sources coming from one particular geographic location is challenging, and so there'll be a greater push than ever for countries without natural resources, particularly in the Far East, China, Japan, Korea, to engage even more in renewable energy. Oil and water storage. So oil pipelines, it's, I think, inevitable that we'll see moves for countries like Qatar and Kuwait to build oil and gas export alternative outlets.
We've already been reporting on some of those talks starting already. Again, a little bit like rail, these are not new concepts. I mean, GCC rail, for example, has been writing about for over 20 years. There's always been that question, is it really needed? And I think the answer is most certainly yes, it's needed now. So we'll get a lot of attention.
So I expect we'll see a lot of pipeline work long distance, wide diameter pipeline work coming up as a result of this. And likewise, underground oil storage, increasing oil reserves, likewise, water storage, emergency water supply works as well. I imagine these will be much more on the cards and focused on. And then finally, defence. Obviously, a lot of defence spending will have to take place now to replenish all the interceptor stocks. And
I think there's two aspects to that. There's the replenish and repair.
Yeah.
And then I think there will also be an enhanced element to that as well. I think that the region, although may not publicly talk about it, there will be certain weak points that they will have felt that they have.
Yeah.
And they'll look to bolster up their defences. So I think it won't be just replenish and repair. I think there'll be a lot of enhancement that comes into that as well.
Yeah. I guess the key will be how much additional defence spending will be taken from what would have been construction.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a key question going forward. Obviously, there's been a lot of spending earmarked for things like tourism and aviation. Will that be sacrificed or give way to allow for more defence spending? I think that's going to be a critical question over the next couple of years.
Okay, so we'll take your questions now. I can see we've already received quite a lot. If you do have any questions from me and Colin, please put them into the chat box and we'll do our best to answer them. You'll see here on the slide in front of you. Again, if you want a copy of these slides, please scan the QR code here, fill the form, and we'll get your email address and send it to you as well. And if you do have any you want to watch this again, of course, this is being recorded and you have the ability to watch this again or share it with colleagues, friends. Right, so questions. I see questions, lots of questions from you all. Thank you for those. Now, a lot of questions around project cancellations and project delays. We've got a comment here from David Brody saying, we assist EPC contractors with force majeure claims. The impact of the hostilities on live EPC projects in the region can only be described as catastrophic, with day-for-day critical delays mounting. Force majeure, Colin. Now, contractors, are they able to claim force majeure on this?
It depends on the contract, but there's certainly an option for a lot of people where they're looking at doing that. Some people, the conversations I've been having are saying that's a route they want to go down. Other people are saying they prefer to go down the road of disruption. I think there's some contracts are saying that if you do declare force majeure, you get time rather than cost. So it depends on the contract and how it's structured and whether it's the best strategy for the contractor to go down that road. But certainly, some of the people I was speaking to, the preferred option is to go down the disruption route. Okay,
yeah. I mean, of course, you know, I guess the UAE hasn't declared it a war or a force majeure situation. Certainly, the developers can't claim force majeure, I don't believe. So it's difficult, maybe legally as well, to whether it's applicable.
You have had some of the NOCs declaring that there's force majeure events for some of their contracts for supply. So there is some precedent there. So I can see why that door has opened. But it just depends on the individual contract and the specifics of that contractor's situation as to whether that's the best tactic that's available to them.
Yeah, and of course, as well, many contracts here don't have cost escalation clauses, lump sum. So for contractors, it's a very tricky situation. I'm sure they'll be talking to their clients, and as you say, maybe time is the compensation rather than increased funding.
Yeah, I think we're going to see that those two things under pressure. It's stating the obvious slightly, but time will come under pressure, as will cost.
But we haven't seen actual. Talking to a question here about projects actually being stopped or cancelled. Have we yet?
We have
actual on-site.
We haven't. We have had some cancellations on projects in Saudi Arabia specifically, but that hasn't really been conflict related.
Yes, I mean directly related to the conflict.
Yeah.
We've obviously seen some kind of big contracts
Yeah.
cancelled on, terminated on Trojena and the line, but that's not related to the conflict. As a direct result, we haven't actually seen any work stop.
No,
not yet anyway.
There's been some projects where work has been delayed. I think the thing to look out for in the market is obviously cash flow is something that's being strained at the moment, particularly on the sort of real estate development side. And if that continues to be a problem, there might be some strains in the financing of construction on sites. And I think that's where we need to be aware that there could be a problem going forward.
Question here about whether we believe there will be a permanent shift in how construction projects are planned, given how supply chain risk has been highlighted during this conflict. Do you think that might, in the long run, be a change that it becomes more expensive as contractors try to create contingencies for this kind of situation, or do you believe it's dependent on the outcome?
Yes, but probably no. I think all these things make a lot of sense at the moment. We tend to, in every crisis, we tend to say this is going to completely change how business is done in the future. The reality is that a few years down the line, everybody's making the same mistakes again. That said, I don't think it's going to be completely overlooked. I expect there will be some lessons learned, but I don't expect it will completely change the way business is done. And while that seems like an incredibly negative thing, I think in some ways it's a good thing that we continually make some of the same mistakes again. Otherwise, we'd never do anything ever again. So I think we just talking on a slightly more sort of philosophical note rather than about this project today, about this question in general. You need to move on and carry on doing things. If we just tie ourselves up and say, well, we never want to make a mistake again, we'll never do anything. So I think, yes, we do need to learn some lessons. Yes, there do need to be some safeguards in place. I think there will be some, but I think inevitably we will continue doing some of the same things over and over again just to progress.
Yeah, some good points there. Question here. Is there a possibility of the UAE making a channel parallel to the Strait of Hormuz through its canal, a canal? I don't think that's not something. I don't think that's seriously.
I mentioned that in the presentation earlier. That's something which has been speculated on quite a long time ago, actually. Perhaps more than 15 years ago. There was some reports of it just as an idea early on in the conflict. My reading of that challenge is that you've got basically, if you just think about what you're trying to achieve there, you're trying to get oil and gas and goods and materials outside of the Gulf, outside of the Strait of Hormuz, and there's better ways to do it than a canal. We talked about railway, overland transport. I mean, if we just look at what the UAE announced, another highway corridor connecting all the Emirates, roads will obviously take a bit more of a priority. And then, of course, on the oil and gas side, pipelines are crucially important. I can see more feasible, more cost-effective of ways of achieving what a canal would achieve. So I don't think the canal is something that would come through. And then, just on a practical sense, from an engineering point of view, you've got the Hajar Mountains, which means it's really quite difficult to do that. There's environmental issues.
It has to be a very deep canal, right? You're talking about massive ships. It's not. There's a huge engineering and cost challenge.
As we learned with the Suez Canal recently, that's not immune to blockages either.
No, there's no guarantee it would be any different in many respects. What do we think about cost increases? Well, we did in our last webinar this topic. We looked at some of the cost implications for projects and pricing. So obviously diesel, 72% increase in the UAE alone. That's going to add a lot of fixed costs for contractors. We've got, we're saying for every $10 increase in the oil price, we're looking at something like a 2 to 4% increase in steel prices, cement, and other core materials. So there is going to be an impact clearly on certain items on construction projects, and of course you can have contingencies which contractors are going to want to factor in, may factor in going forward. So there are going to be some cost increases. How much that is, I think, depends on how long the conflict lasts. If it's going to see the strait closed for another 2 months, then we're going to see a larger increase. If Strait of Hormuz opens tomorrow, then that might be more limited. But there are already looking at 5 to 10%, I think, in terms of some direct like-for-like comparisons. Colin, do you any thoughts there?
No, I think you made the key point. It's an issue, and the issue gets worse the longer the disruption continues for.
Yeah. Do you think COVID, what's worse, this conflict or the COVID, in terms of what you think the eventual outcome will be for claims and overall impact on projects and project delivery?
I think it's worse. I think my reasoning for that is, if we just look at things in relative terms, the Dubai in particular, but the GCC generally, emerged from COVID quite quickly, and in relative terms was better than the rest of the world by sort of Christmas 2020, early 2021. Dubai in particular had a massive boost from having Expo, which had been delayed, which allowed Dubai really to announce to the world that we're open, we're ready for business, and that really helped generate a wave that Dubai then rode incredibly successfully for a number of years post-COVID. I don't see a similar opportunity for the region post this conflict. And then, of course, in relative terms, the rest of the world hasn't been affected with the security situation. Yes, oil and gas prices have increased, but the security threat hasn't been there.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be more challenging coming out of this crisis than it would out of COVID. And
of course, you've got other issues like the Dubai property market. What the impact is going to be there on property prices, demand, investor sentiment.
The property market, I mean, just talking about that specifically, the property market had been in a period of sustained decline leading into the COVID pandemic. I think that the pandemic really allowed the Dubai property market to find a floor, and then it was able to build from that floor. This time we're going into a crisis where the property market, arguably, according to some people, was in an overheated position. So the market dynamics coming into this crisis are very, very different as well. Again, on our project numbers, we've had 3 years of record contract awards coming in. Before COVID, the Saudi market had been in a period of getting ready to rebuild. Very different market dynamics coming in.
And I guess as we conclude, we should also maybe pause to think about opportunities emerging from this. I mean, we talked about renewables, acceleration in railway investment, metro investment, port investment, and so on. There'll certainly be growth sectors emerging from this, but I think also potentially Iran, market of 90 million people, huge demand for investment and infrastructure work could, as a result of this, open up and could be a massive new opportunity, both in terms of two-way investment.
I think the Iran one is a very long-term question, as far as I see it at the moment. I think that being positive about the outlook for the GCC in particular at the moment, I think as we move past the conflict, the last 5 years it's been very, very difficult for people to identify the opportunities that are real. There's been a lot of projects that have been launched that are very ambitious, and the question's been, and we've debated this ourselves in the office, is that project going to go ahead? Is it actually going to work? Some of the things that, very complex designs, not really sure what the business case is. The things that we've discussed in the webinar today, those strategic priorities, there's a clear business case for it. There's a clear strategic need for it, and it's infrastructure that we know works. A railway, for example, we're not talking about some kind of structure that's never been delivered before. So I think while the opportunities, there may not be quite so many of them, and the scale might not be quite what we've become accustomed to over the last 5 years, I think they are very much real opportunities when they come.
Wonderful. Right, so on that note, we'll come to the end of this discussion. Thank you very much for your comments and your questions. We hope you've all enjoyed this live session. This is, I think, the 5th discussion webinar we've done on the topic. No doubt there will be more to come. Hopefully things will improve, and we'll be talking about the end of the conflict and recovery. But for now, thank you very much for all attending and listening in today. Feel free to reach out to us anytime. Scan this QR code if you want a copy of the presentation. And we look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.